this does impact dating in so many different ways. And I think that it can be really easy to just sort of write it off like in sort of a broad category. Yeah, sure, it makes dating harder. But when you actually examine it and you start to recognize that, oh, okay, well, it's not just where do we meet, it's now how do we get to know each other? And okay, now we have known each other for a while and maybe we want to get physically intimate, but there are other people in the house and nobody ever fucking leaves. You never get the house like to yourself. And like these things just can stack up. And you go from somebody who, you know, wants to be out in the dating scene and is willing to put some effort into it to now being somebody who's like, ugh, there's just too many steps. There's just too much to cope with.
Different world.
Yeah,
it is a different world. Yeah, but so some of those alternatives to, you know, how to date, where to date, going for a walk is kind of the obvious number one, and it's tough right now, especially if you're in Central Texas,
where it is just super August, y'all. It is very August here. It's so August.
Yeah, but if you're a morning person, you can wake up and go for a walk with someone first thing in the morning, maybe grab some coffee to go, walk along and drink coffees together. It can be kind of nice. Just from a safety point of view, I wouldn't recommend meeting a stranger for a walk at nighttime, you know, but
know your surroundings. I mean, there is that need to, I think, you know, keep your normal checklist in mind, but then just add to it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can set up picnics. I've seen a lot of people doing this where they meet someone for a little picnic. You know, you both can bring your own food, sit at opposite ends of the blanket and have a conversation and eat. You know, you can even go for a swim together some places, depending on where you are and if you feel like that's safe. You can go for a bike ride. This is a great time if you're a physically active person.
No, I mean, you're not wrong. My partner and I just, I mean, we had to murder 20 people, but we were able to buy some kayaks. And apparently we weren't the only people with that idea. And, you know, now 20 of them are dead. But yeah, it's great to be getting out into the world and having a date. But yeah, you got to be willing to make it work, to figure out what fits.
Right. Be flexible.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that brings us on down, I guess, to the third point on your list, which was just recognize your feelings. I'm curious what you mean here.
Yeah. Recognize your feelings. This is a tip for dating anytime, anywhere, especially right now, because it's like, okay, are you dating because you're feeling really lonely? There's a lot of loneliness right now, and that's understandable. So, you know, are you looking for a connection with someone just as friends? Are you looking for a relationship? What kind of relationship are you looking for? This is a great time to really ask yourself those questions. Ask yourself what you want in a partner and what you want a relationship to look like, because things are moving slowly sometimes and fast other times, but it's a great time to just sit back and explore what you want and what you need and to practice communicating that with other people.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth reminding people, I think, about the episode we did with Annette James a couple of months ago about how your feelings can just sneak up on you during this time. When you're not feeling especially grounded and you're being exposed to more stresses than you're used to, but definitely different stresses, ones that you haven't already developed sort of a barometer for. Now they can really overwhelm you, often without even noticing that that's going on.
Yes.
Definitely. Sneaky emotions.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, if they're not around as much, you don't notice it as much because you're not getting that stimulation as often, and so it's just tickling you. It's just.
Well, and we tend to have these little hallmarks in our life. We tend to know when we get into our car every single day at 7:45 whether or not we're going to be tired for the rest of the day, because we get into the car every day at 7:45, and we can use that as sort of a testing site to know what our tiredness is. And I'm just using one example here, but there are so many things like that that are built into our standard routines. And now that our routines have all just been thrown into total chaos, or at the same time, or for different people, put into such tight boxes where the routine is just so repetitive as to not even be noticeable, the little changes in our body, little changes in our nervous system and in our mood and in our mind, they can be really easy to miss.
Right. Especially being in one place for so much of the time, just being in your little bubble that you're existing in and not getting that exposure to the outside world.
Yeah. Well, we've hit on this a couple of times in some different ways, but one of the really annoying pieces of advice that I like to just bother people with is to take a page from the poly playbook when it comes to dating, because poly folks, in my experience, or if I can speak broadly, often have this sort of like date zero concept where that what we might otherwise call a first date isn't really a date. Like, they're not even necessarily there to, quote, have a good time, so much as to just like go through a checklist of, are you right for me? Are you somebody worth me investigating in? Do we line up? Are my like poly folks will oftentimes say, this is my relationship orientation. This is the space I have in my life. This is the relationship dynamic that I'm looking for. These are my values. These are, all of these different adjectives. And outside of that, monogamous folks aren't necessarily in that same habit. So anyway, I didn't mean to lecture there on polyamory, but I feel like there's a lot of utility in having that type of conversation really early on, and not getting, like we said, too invested in a text message conversation or in a relationship that hasn't checked off certain boxes. How is that changing when you can't just go out and meet somebody for a date? When, like we were talking with Brutus, you do have that 2-week waiting period, and you have to kind of save that coin up and spend it more wisely.
Well, that just means date zero can be, by text, and then you move on when you've moved on because you've moved to a different format.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. Yeah, I think it's even more important to have those conversations right now, and also to be okay with saying, I don't know, right? But, in that conversation of, okay, what is this? What does this mean? Where are we going? What do we both want? It's okay to say, I don't know, especially if you haven't met the person yet, or if you haven't met them in person. It's okay to say, I don't know, but I am interested in continuing to get to know you. I think it's also something that I've been noticing is just this, like, the importance of communicating where you're at with each other when it's so easy for there to be misunderstandings and for you to be on completely different pages, because I've seen some instances of people getting into these relationships, and it's just by text, maybe the occasional phone call, and it's getting really intense. And the people are relying on each other because this is an intense time, and when you find that connection, it's natural to want to kind of latch on and continue talking with that person. But you might be on two totally different pages, where one person is like, great, we're talking, we're getting to know each other. And the other person is like, we're in a relationship, so being really open and communicating that, I think is really especially important even now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it raises a good point, because I don't mean to make it sound as if long distance relationships or relationships that only exist online or through text message, that they aren't valid. They certainly are. there are great opportunities to have entire relationships that are incredibly meaningful strictly through text or strictly through email. But I feel like when people are navigating the sort of kink spaces that function that way, or when they're navigating a long distance relationship, it's very explicit, right? Like everybody is having those conversations that you're talking about, where we identify, what is it that you're looking for and what is okay.
All the people involved need to know what page you're on.
Mm-hmm.